answer to, which is, can ICE pull people over for things, police things, like a broken tail light or for driving? Can ICE pull people over for things a police officer would, like a broken tail light or a driving infraction? And the answer was, can they? We don't know, but they do. So it happens, and driving away isn't going to make them stop. So you can pull over. They can't, what's the word for it? Inspect your car without a judicial warrant on your car, but you do have to give them a driver's license. How did the role play go?
Interesting questions.
We found the hard part was how to handle it when the ICE officer does have the judicial warrant. That's a little bit more, what is the...
So when they have the warrant, what do you still have? What can you still do?
You have your rights to remain silent, to ask for your attorney, to ask for their identification, to ask to see the warrant.
And to document what's happening.
Someone, there was a question too that someone asked me, and if you see someone is being detained in a public space and you happen to be there, you shouldn't interfere, you shouldn't physically stop that interaction from happening, because that is not good for any party involved, but you can kind of stand near the person, the agent, and assert your rights. You can stand next to, I'll just do this example. Let's say there's an ICE agent trying to detain Sarah, and I could say, Sarah, you have a right to remain silent. You don't have to answer his questions. Don't talk to anyone. You don't have to answer his questions without a lawyer. You don't have to sign anything. And I can keep repeating that over and over again, and I'm perfectly within my rights to do that. Make sure you're staying a safe distance away. You don't want to be this close to the ICE agent. That probably isn't good. But you can stand this distance in between and just, kind of assert that person's rights. Yes.
Also heard it's really good to say it loud, so if other people in the area they hear it,
Yeah.
you can say, "This is an ICE agent." But also we had a question of if that person in a public space had that little app, push the button on the app, can they hand their phone to somebody? Or would the ICE agent likely won't take that away as evidence? Do you know if they would insist on taking it, or could she give it away to some?
You could try.
You could definitely try.
Yeah.
If what that app will do is when they push the button, it basically locks it up,
Right.
so that the agent can't. But if they felt comfortable taking, if they felt comfortable giving you their phone so that they couldn't, just to be sure, that's definitely something that's kind of dependent on the situation and whether or not that person feels comfortable doing so. But that is an option, yes.
And you always want to do, if to whatever extent you can in the situation, you want to do what that person who is being targeted wants you to. So they're the one this is happening to. If they say, no, I'm going to get detained because I don't want to have this battle, that is their choice. If you ask them, if you have an opportunity, instead of just asserting their rights, ask them, I can talk to the ICE agent and tell them you don't want to talk. And then, maybe they want you to, maybe they want to assert their own rights. So, there might not be time, but as much as possible, the person who is being targeted by ICE needs to be the one with the agency.
Yes.
What happened if you're helping someone and they're in your car and you get stopped?
That actually was in one of these videos that we unfortunately just didn't have time to get to. There was a case, and I think it was New York, where someone, it was a volunteer, was driving some immigrants either to or from their court date, and ICE agents actually stopped him. And what he did is he rolled down the window just enough where they could pass through paperwork, and he said what we were talking about earlier, asserting your rights. He asked, well, let's see your warrant. And they passed him through the window something that looked like the administrative warrant, the removal order. And what he did then is he just kept talking to them and saying, no, this isn't valid, you don't have the authority to take these people from my vehicle. And then he got on the phone with their lawyer. So as this was going on, he was talking to the lawyer, and I believe that those people did not get detained. So in a situation like that, say you're driving someone to a doctor's appointment, it's an immigrant, and ICE stops you. you'd want to roll down your window and say, okay, well, you're looking for so-and-so, well, can I see your warrant? And if they don't hand you a warrant, or they hand you what they handed the gentleman, which is order of removal, you can say, well, I'm sorry, you don't have the authority to take these people. Your car is your private property. Now, if the agent did something like bust the window, which did happen in, I believe it was Texas or another state, you definitely shouldn't resist, because that could make it worse. But in situations like that, if you're driving someone who's undocumented, you do have a little bit more power because your vehicle is your private property.
A lot of times the strategy is to have you give up your rights out of intimidation. So that's why there's going to be things that don't work just the way they should, but that's why knowing your rights is so important, because that is the path of least resistance that a lot of times ICE will do, is they'll just say in a way that makes you want to comply because it's scary. So that's why it's important to practice and to go in knowing what those rights are.
And I forgot to mention this in an earlier slide, so I'll mention this now. So ICE put out, is anyone familiar with the statement that ICE put out last week that was basically saying they have the right to detain anyone they want without an administrative warrant, with an administrative warrant, and then reference something called 287G, which supposedly gives them the right to do that. I kind of wanted to clarify what 287G is and why that's not correct. 287G, what ICE was referencing in that statement they put out to the American public, is basically what it does is a program that allows DHS to deputize local police to do immigration work. So that is, of course, illegal in Washington state because it keeps Washington working, but in some states like Florida, Texas, states in the Deep South, they do this, and what that is DHS will deputize, or it's kind of like a ceremonial thing that allows them to do ICE's work for them. It does not bypass the need for a judicial warrant if they're going to enter someone's private property. And it is something that's very problematic. It's led to a lot of civil rights abuses and things like that. So just something to keep in mind. ICE likes to say, well, I don't need a judicial warrant, and that is, in many cases, unfortunately, just not the case. Yes?
When you're in your private car, because it is private property, isn't it only the driver who has to show ID?
I think so, yeah. Okay, and then it's kind of, oops, I'm gonna sit right here. Kind of going on, so this is just kind of leaving off starting where we left off. If you are a verifier, or you're at the scene of an ICE activity, or even if you're not on a team, but you've taken some video and you want to send that to WISN so they can act on it or not, you would want to send that, your video to info@wisn.org within 24 hours of the event that happened. And just kind of write a really short summary attached to that of the facts, you know, who, what, when, where, why, what happened, and try to make this as factual as possible. Don't use euphemisms, don't say things like the fastest thug ICE agent's probably not going to look well in court. But just a short write-up that's very concise of what happened, like an incident report. If you're writing an incident report for work, it would be something like that, and then you would send it to WISN within 24 hours. And they would, from there, decide what to do, if anything, or what the next steps should be going forward.
And people have short memories for things, so the sooner you do it, the better, because it's just happened is when you're going to have the most details, and you're going to not be influenced by other things that you think about. So just get it done.
So can you ask an ICE agent for their card?
For their badge?
No, their card.
Oh, their identifying card.
Right.
Their business card. Yeah.
You definitely should ask an agent for any identifying information, their badge number, a business card, any or their name. Whether or not they'll give it to you is another story, but you should always ask and try to get that information if you can.
I thought they had to.
Well, we saw those two in the video not doing it, so that's gonna count against them later, but they're gonna do it in the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, and then got that. Okay, and then we kind of went over the risks and the rights, so the risk part of it earlier before we went to breakout groups. There is always a risk of these kinds of things, but again, it's kind of utilize your privilege. If you're a white ally, the likelihood of you getting detained by ICE or getting harassed by ICE or physically assaulted by ICE is far less than someone who looks like me or someone who is from the immigrant community. So that's something to keep in mind. It does have risks, and it is something that to keep in mind before joining a rapid response team. But remember, you still have the rights. You still have rights yourself. You have the right to record agents. Always let them know you're recording them. So before you start filming, you want to let everyone know that you're recording. And you cannot legally enter locations you are prohibited. So if you're in a restaurant and ICE goes to like the kitchen of the restaurant, you don't follow them back there. You record from the areas you're able to record from.
And we touched on this earlier, but this is why we say you don't want to respond if you are under the influence of something or if your judgment is impaired for any reason. Because you can imagine, like, you're the video person, you just could keep going into that place that it's illegal for you to go to, and then you put yourself in legal jeopardy as well. So you really want to own your decisions and be in a mental state where you can own them when you're doing this.
Okay, I'll just go. So I'll just kind of go. Deportation defense is a little different. It's a little more complicated. One part that can be part of a deportation defense is accompaniment. In some cases, like accompanying someone to their immigration court case. And accompaniment is actually a pretty recent thing. It's been established within the last year by Wysen, and the reason why is someone mentioned this earlier about ICE stocking courthouses. We had a lot of that happening in Ephrata, which is in eastern Washington. So Wysen created this accompaniment program. So now, if someone needs someone to accompany them to a doctor's office, a court case, or anything like that, they can call the hotline and be paired with someone that way.
And there's training for that that's separate from this that I think a couple of people identified that maybe they'd be interested in that. So Wysen does training for accompaniment as well.
Right. And this is some more information, some more know your rights information. I think that's it. Yeah, and that's the information here. Does anyone else have any questions or anything like that? Yes.
When you said you should announce when you're starting to tape, why is that?
Just to let everyone know that you're recording and that you don't want to startle a law enforcement officer by suddenly recording, so it's always a good idea to let them know, even if it's just a regular police officer, to let them know that you are recording. Yes?
If we're interested in getting involved with a rapid response team in our area, like what's the best way to find the right contact and see if there is a group in our area already?
I would definitely contact Wysen. Where is that? I'll go back because it has here. That's also the contact email for Wysen. So I would definitely contact them and ask. I know that there's Indivisible Kirkland has started up their own Kirkland Rapid Response, and Sarah Franklin in the back right there. Wave your hand, Sarah. Hi. She's leads the Kirkland Rapid Response.
We're gonna cover Redmond too for now.
And Redmond, okay.
Kirkland and Redmond.
And Wysen it's a small number of people doing a lot of work over the whole state. So sometimes you can reach out and it can take a little while to hear back from them. And it might be worth, if you try once, try again and give it a week or a week and a half and try again, because sometimes they're really in the thick of something and everything will go by the wayside for a
But if you're looking for a team to just jump on right now, I would definitely connect with Sarah in the back. they have a team that's forming right here that's going to cover Kirkland and Redmond, and we're really hoping that we'll have a team that forms for Shoreline. I know myself and Sarah were super crazy busy, and unfortunately I can't lead all of the teams here in the area. I do try my best to give advice when I can, but I will definitely recommend connecting with Sarah if you want to jump on like a team right now. Leo.
You mentioned the north end, and I didn't quite catch, or maybe you could just say if you have any teams forming in areas like Linwood or Everett?
Right. Short answer is I'm not sure. I haven't heard of anything. I'll probably have a better answer when I come back from the Lawson State Gathering. That's a gathering where everyone from Lawson will gather together in Eastern Washington. So if there's a team there, I should know by then. I don't think that there is, but we're hoping that by doing a bunch of these trainings with different groups, hosting is that we can cover as many areas as possible, and hopefully we can get some teams or at least some verifiers up there. Yes.
I'm a little intimidated because I don't speak Spanish, and I will agree. Focus is often of those people who speak Spanish or who are from one of the regional communities, easily identifiable by the church they go to, clothing, that being there. And so, being an old white lady who doesn't speak any foreign languages, I was feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Speaking of, it's not that I couldn't videotape or that I wouldn't want to do something, but I may not know what the dialogue is. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm feeling a little, is it better to step in or to step out?
In that situation, I would say it's if you're there, definitely record, even if you can't speak the same language or dialect as a person. We can at least know what's going on, and then Lawson would be able to identify if that person speaks another language. They would be able to connect that person with help that would speak that same language. But knowing what's happening and what's going on is important, even if you don't speak the same language.
And being in the same situation and having had just enough Spanish to know that I can't have a conversation in it, I have the Spanish language, Know Your Rights, up on my refrigerator so that I'm looking at it all the time and just practicing that little piece, just kind of like if you were traveling, that would be traveling language. It's just things that I feel like I need to know in Spanish to have a very short conversation about the situation that might be going on.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, so we'll take one more question.
Is there required to be a lawyer for folks in immigration detention? Do you have a right to a lawyer?
The right, but they don't, not the right to a lawyer free of charge.
You have the right to be represented, but you don't have the right for access. So whether or not you have that access is a different question. Some places do, like Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project does do a lot of pro bono work, but they don't, there's a certain limit to the pro bono cases they can take. So it really just depends. You definitely have the right to be represented. Unfortunately, unlike the criminal court here where they will appoint a public defender, it unfortunately doesn't work that way in immigration detention court. So you do have the right to representation. Unfortunately, whether or not you have the access or the funds for it is an entirely different question.
And funds, it comes down to funds a lot, both for the bond that would let somebody.
Right, so bonds, so when someone is, when an immigrant is, so immigrants in detention are often granted bond, and what that is, and that bond can be anywhere between $3,000, and we've seen it be as high as like $30,000, and that has to be paid in full. A lot of the times it's very costly, and a lot of families can't afford it. So Wyson has the Verified Bond Fund, which we take applications from people in detention, and then if we accept the application, we will pay their bond, and then that person will be released on bond until their next immigration court date. And it's found that when people are released back into the community with support, they have a really high rate of making those court dates because, I mean, like everyone else, they really want their case to succeed, and you can't do that if they're not, you know, if they don't show up. So the Fair Fight Bond Fund through Austin, we do cover the costs of some of the immigrants that are in detention. We will pay their bond so that they can be released back into the community while they await their court date. Yes, Ann?
I'm just gonna point out it's 5:16.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I think we're done with
Okay.
the slide.
Thank you so much.
And this will be emailed out, so you don't feel like